we good? Recording, Joseph?
That's going. Are you recording?
Yes.
And if he doesn't, it's
yes.
his fault.
It would be my fault.
Yes.
But we should be good now. All right. Hi, everybody. I am Ernesto. I am an engineering lead at AmericanEagle.com. We do website design, application development. We are not the airline or the clothing company. So common mistake. I actually didn't apply there initially because I thought it was clothing. Anyway, it worked out. So today, I want to talk a little bit about React and server-side rendering and how we managed to scale it up by not using React. And if you're paying attention, this probably looks like kind of a little bit of a provocative title. Because it is. Obviously, React's still involved. We love React, and I want to just tell you a little bit about the constraints that we had to deal with and the solutions that we found in order to meet our goals. So, also, my Twitter handle is on the bottom left. I don't really tweet much other than random Smash videos. So if you're into Smash and development, go for it. But I'm not super active otherwise. But I'm there. So let's get started. Why does SSR or server-side rendering matter in your apps? SEO is the main thing. If you ever write any application that is going to be publicly accessible, you want to make sure that all of your content is indexable by Googlebot. What does that mean? It means that when Googlebot hits your site, it's going to download all of the HTML that your server generates, and it's going to look at that content, and that's what it's going to allow. It's going to actually index so that when people search for content, it'll go through that stuff. Now, you might say to me, but Ernesto, Googlebot now runs evergreen Chrome even, so you don't even need polyfills. It'll run all your JavaScript, and it'll actually index all of that content. And I would say you are correct. It does do that. But you probably have noticed this yourselves. Running Chrome is not a lightweight app, right? It likes to use memory. It likes to use CPU. And it turns out that even if you run it headlessly, it's a lot of the same problems that happen. And so what Google does in order to do this with some degree of success is they reduce the priority with which they will actually index your JavaScript or your sites after JavaScript executes. It could mean a couple of days later after the initial index. It could mean a week. It could mean never. It could mean that literally your code never gets indexed by Google. And in some cases, this could really be a huge problem. It could cost a customer thousands and thousands of dollars or even more, right? Those are really critical. We want to be able to use it. Other two really good options, performance and UX. So performance, again, if you are able to do all that rendering on the server and you just cache it in the CDN, you give it to the client, everything is great. You don't have to wait for React to do all this kind of stuff, right? And the other advantage kind of related to this is that your UX will improve because you won't have that flash of kind of, I don't know if you ever do anything with React, as most of the clients that are any JS framework really, you see a blank page and then all of a sudden, boom, the whole content appears after a second. And then on every other load, it's faster because it's cached. It helps avoid that, right? So that's also a really nice advantage. And you might be thinking, but Ernesto, we have Next, we have Gatsby. These are awesome. Why are you here? Why are you talking about this? And I would tell you, well, our constraints were really interesting. Really what I'm hoping is that you kind of, I'm hoping to share a technique that I think is kind of interesting, a little bit perhaps unusual in some ways, and maybe you'll be able to use some of this yourselves. So let's get started. So what are our constraints? The big one, we have to serve millions of pages. So I'm talking 5 to 10 million pages, unique pages that have to be served. For example, products, right? Like a big product catalog. Imagine a store that sells parts for all kinds of stuff, right? So you're talking tons and tons of pages. Usually you would say, well, you can probably just optimize this by putting a CDN in front of it and everything should be fine. Well, unfortunately, our cache hit rates can be like under 50%. That means that only 50% of your pages, roughly, will actually be hit twice. This is because people will literally search maybe for the model number in Google. They land directly on the product details page that nobody has ever seen before, and so the server has to render it at that moment. And we want this stuff to be fast, right? The speed matters, and speed is very relative, right? Speed, if you have a small app versus a massive app like this that might have, thousands of users, whatever. I didn't want to put any specific numbers, right? For us, it was really our goal was to keep our time to first bytes very low, keep our requests per second high, and try to reduce the server resources that we use as much as possible. And so another constraint that is really fun is the cache freshness that we generally are expected to have is usually like maybe under 2 days. We can kind of swing 2 days, but it's not ideal. So keep that in mind, right? Ideally, a lot of our clients will say, no, I mean, I made the change to my database. I want to see the update now. I don't want to wait, right? So even a few minutes is too much. Sometimes a day or two is okay, but let's just say for today, we're going to shoot for about 2 days. Now, render to string. If you ever do server-side rendering with React, essentially what happens is there's a function called render to string that the React DOM server will has, and it'll take a React tree and it'll convert it into HTML, right? Whatever is going to go to the browser. And that function is really slow. And the more components you put on your page, the slower it gets. Now, again, depending on your use case, this might not affect you that much. When you're dealing with traditionally hosted app with even Next, where you have independent node instances running this stuff, your requests per second will actually start to drop pretty quickly, almost too quickly in some cases. Is what we found. But it's just something else that we basically were trying to avoid, because it meant that while you could throw a lot of money, add a bunch of hardware to it, it's just something that, why should I do that? Why do I need to add all this hardware for something that really shouldn't be that slow? I mean, if I can render pages with any other system and tens of thousands per second, why is this such a big deal here, right? And some people might say, render to node stream, maybe try streaming instead. It's still CPU bound, it's still going to be slow. You get a little bit better throughput, as far as I know, better memory kind of usage metrics, but still has a lot of the same issues. And most important one, a lot of developers love React. Right? We, out of American Eagle, we're starting to use React in a lot of different applications. In the product that I'm helping build, we use React in a lot of it, right? And so we want to make sure that we can use it on our front end of our system, and it needs to, again, support SEO and do everything so that our clients, can make their money, basically. And this is where it gets even more fun. And I heard the word enterprisey earlier. Turns out that there are backends other than Node that people still use. We're a .NET shop primarily, right? So when you're using something like .NET, Java, PHP, nothing wrong with that, you don't get the benefits of a Node backend, right? So if you want to call render to string, even regardless of any performance characteristics, whatever it is, you just simply can't. Now, .NET Core got really close. They got really close. They had this system called JavaScript Services, and you would essentially start your .NET process. It would also start a Node process, and it would talk to it through a back channel. And magic would happen, and .NET will tell Node, hey, run this JavaScript function for me. Give me that content, and I will render it out to a client. Pretty cool. In fact, we use that for development, which is fantastic. It'll have Webpack running, so you start your .NET app, and you get both the .NET side of things running and ready for developers, but also the client side stuff. But unfortunately, one of the limitations of it is that it only created a single node instance. And if you know about how node scales on the server, you really want one per core. So if you put this on a server with 8 cores, you're going to have 8 cores running .NET and 1 core running JavaScript. So it's not going to scale. So it even hurts the performance metrics of, or the performance hurts even more because of this. What's even worse is that part of the problem is that we want to keep our costs low again. And the other thing, of course, is that the complexity increases. Now I have to worry about 2 processes in production at least, instead of just the one that, I'm going to get a call, the day before I'm going on vacation about something. Now I have, twice the chance of getting called. And I'm trying to avoid that, so we want to limit what's on the server. And there were a couple of kind of self-imposed constraints. One of them is we want to keep a single copy of the markup for each component. So let's say somebody tells you, okay, this is what your title tags are going to look like, and they have a div wrapper, some classes, whatever. You don't want to define that in 2 places, right? You don't want to maintain it in one place and in another. The reason I bring this up is, and you'll see very soon, is because our approach is sort of a hybrid setup. Some of it is on the server, some of it is going to be on the client. So we want to be very careful about avoiding duplication when as much as we can. Now, we again, we want to keep server-side complexity to a minimum. So the architectural and the hosting aspect is one of them. A lot of the solutions that I'm going to talk about, so some of the alternatives that we looked at, will require additional middleware, will require a lot of configuration, potentially workers that are running 24/7, and that just adds complexity that we really want to not have to deal with, basically.
Here,
Yes.
I'm just curious, and I know I'm jumping back like a slide or two.
It's okay.
You had in there that render to string was really slow.
Yes.
And I guess I'm curious if through your investigating this and trying to figure out how to resolve this, like we're so used to React, especially in the last couple of years, kind of reinventing itself or changing its, kind of cannibalizing itself and coming out with much newer APIs and faster APIs. Is render to string and some of the we don't hear so much about that, the server-side stuff, so is that not something that they're actively improving on, or are we just kind of accepting at this point that this is a known constraint and nobody's really going to improve it?
As far as I know, and to me it sort of makes sense, right? Facebook, like I look at it from the perspective of Facebook as a business, would they want to necessarily invest in this? I mean, not necessarily, right? Because they don't have to render the stuff on the server, really. They're not affected by SEO nearly as much. So, they do actually, what Facebook does is actually very similar to what we ended up doing. We just have to kind of take it a step further for some other
Facebook doesn't have an SEO problem.
Right, exactly. But I mean, like, Facebook pages, if those are React, some of the, anyway, a lot of that stuff is still server rendered. So I don't think there is. I know they're working on something where there's like streaming from the server and there's all these other benefits. But as far as I know, there's nothing. I mean, I could be wrong, and I would love to be told that there's something coming. I mean, I'm more than happy to say, oh, shoot, okay, we got something different coming. That would be awesome. But as far as I know, it's still kind of stuck. So.
You mentioned something was coming for 2 years.
Yeah.
Like suspense.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're very well named. So, alternatives. I mentioned Gatsby and Next, so let's talk about these a little bit. Gatsby is awesome. If I have a site with, and actually we had a really great talk. Steve, where are you? Woo! We had a great talk on Gatsby. He's actually a contributor to Gatsby. And depending on the number of pages that your site has, it's great. It'll generate a site that's going to be lightning fast, super cheap to host. It's fantastic. Love it. But it doesn't support incremental builds. Actually, right after Steve did his talk, I asked him, what do you think about if you have like maybe a few million items? And he was like, yeah, no, don't do that. And one of the problems is that Gatsby doesn't support incremental builds. So every time you make any changes, you have to rebuild the whole thing. And presumably it uses render to string behind the scenes somewhere to generate the stuff, I would think, to some extent. And it's probably going to take a while to render. What's that?
I'm sorry, I was talking to myself.
Oh. It's probably going to take a while, right? And we actually make changes that are global to our site. So even if you just change one product page or one content page, it might be that you still need to re-render the whole thing. Very inefficient. Now Next is awesome. If you're doing, again, smallish projects, fantastic. I've been using it for some projects that I feel are more well suited to it. It's great. But again, our backend is .NET. It's not Node, so we can't really switch that. So we're kind of in a position where we're like, yeah, we kind of like it, but we also know that because we want to do a more of a traditional hosting environment, it doesn't really work out. Now, Zeit now is awesome. If you have a ton of content, a lot of pages, and you want to make sure this scales out, put it on now. You're not going to have any issues. I don't know enough about the cost of it or anything, but the backend was kind of a deal breaker for us, so that's where I kind of stopped looking. But definitely very valuable. So this is where the math got us, and one of the other options that we have is something called dynamic rendering, and this is something that Google recommends, and they say, listen, if you have a page and a lot of your content shows up client side, you can basically lie to us, lie to Googlebot. Googlebot comes to your site, you detect that, and you essentially, instead of giving it the regular HTML with just the includes for your JavaScript, you give it what the JavaScript would generate. And the way you do this, at least one of the ways that you can do this, is by using headless Chrome, which is fantastic. You just have Chrome installed, you call it through the CLI, you have it hit a page, you wait a little bit, it renders, boom, you send the HTML down. But of course, again, going back to Chrome taking some resources, it's not free to do this. You can't just do that, right? It's going to take some time. So I did some math. We have 5 million pages. again, sort of, in a couple of cases that we have, that could be generous. 500 millisecond renders, also generous. I would see more like 800 to a second on pretty simple pages, so it's gonna take some time. A single worker working 24/7 is gonna take about a month, right? 4 workers about a week, 15 workers about 2 days. I'm sure you could optimize it to do a little more async stuff, but let's just say it's 15 workers will take about 2 days. So if you want to have that 2-day freshness, you're going to have 15 tasks running, right? Using up at least a core, right? Or however you optimize it, 24/7, literally. So, and of course, if anything goes wrong, now your cache is not fresh anymore, right? You could be over the 2 days, and now you have an angry client. That actually kind of averages out to about 30 requests a second. So not only does it have to do all this, it's going to be hitting your site, right? You're getting all this unnecessary traffic, something else to think about. And you don't want to do this when Google comes to your site. That's too late. Google doesn't want to see your page take a second or however long. Let's just pretend it's just 100 milliseconds, there's no overhead. They don't want to see that, right? They want to see it loading way faster than that. And you want to cache that and put it somewhere. If you say the output is about 50K, also generous, because I've seen more like 75 to 100. It's about 240 gigs to store all this stuff. That's not free either, right? Storage is cheap, but again, it's just something else to deal with, and your backend becomes a little more complex. So we were really trying to avoid this. Now, again, this doesn't mean that if you have a site with maybe a few thousand pages, maybe this will work just fine. And in fact, a really nice solution you can pay for is pre-render IO. They're not paying me to say this, but they're great. They basically do what this dynamic rendering system requires as a service. You just pay them, you set up a little bit of middleware, and they will handle all of this for you. You pay based on cache freshness. Essentially, a lot of the same parameters that you're seeing here, you pay them for, and again, it'll work great. But we were trying to make our lives a little harder, and so we avoided, we just didn't want to add more to our backend. So what did we come up with? Well, the case study that I want to show you today, and I have a little bit of code and a quick demo to do, is a product details page, right? So imagine your favorite e-commerce website, you go to it, and you're going to view the details for a product that you want to buy. So if you're buying a shirt, you will see some images for the shirt, an add to cart button, selections, so you can pick the size and color, the availability, and so on. Now, the SEO bits, so all the important stuff, all the critical things that Google really, really cares about, or that you care that Google sees, everything in your head tag, right? You can't just let the client do that. Although I did find out that if you modify the document title after and Google runs your JS, they will look at that title, which kind of blew my mind. I didn't think they would do that, but they do. But again, why have to wait? Like just give it to Google and meet them. Your H1s and as much content as possible. So if you have paragraphs of content, imagine like if you have like wrinkle-free shirts or something, you want to put that on there, and you want to see somebody searches for awesome wrinkle-free shirt, boom, that's gonna show your content, right? You want to include that stuff in. Now, a couple of the things I'm going to also talk about are more about kind of slight performance optimizations around these patterns. They don't necessarily have to do with SEO, but I want to mention them anyway because there was kind of nice side effects of what we ended up achieving. The initial state for kind of the React app for the page that you're on will be put into the window. And if you've looked at server-side rendering with Redux, it actually does basically this. It looks almost identical. In fact, I linked to it. The source code that I'll put up on GitHub if you want to look at it, and there's a link to the documentation from Redux. And I'll include in here, the product name and the price, potentially other details like that might not be necessarily SEO critical, but I want to have available within the React app so that I don't have to fetch you doing Ajax after the fact. One other cool thing that we did that I'm not going to demo today, but I just want to mention, if let's say if you ever have a product where the price is dependent on the user, right? You can, all of this content that you see here would be cached by your CDN, right? It'll remember all this stuff. But let's say that you want price to be user specific. That doesn't work anymore. So what we did is kind of build a framework where we just tell the backend developer, just don't include the price. Just don't send it to us. The client realizes this and then makes a query to grab all this stuff. It's kind of like a sort of a custom way of doing GraphQL within our system. But it's a really nice, flexible way to make these customizations without a lot of code changes. And so we get to portals, and if you've ever used React portals, you will know that their primary use is for things like modals or popovers and things like that, where you basically want to take a div that is really close to like the closing body tag for many reasons, and you want to get a reference to it from React. We actually found a kind of an interesting use for this that is a little bit different, right? So that the target element that the portal will hit, and I'll show you demo code for this, is rendered by our backend, which happens to be .NET, right? And again, this could be any backend. It doesn't have to be .NET, it could be PHP, it could be anything, it could be a flat file. And then React will see that ID, and it'll create a portal to it. And what that enables us to do is now the server decides where all these different chunks go, right? You don't have to touch your React code, that stays the same, but the server gets to determine that layout. And this is very common if you have like a CMS. Somebody says, well, for this product I want layout 1, for this one I want layout 2. Boom, that's how you get it, right? You don't have to do this. You could do this client side, but then you have the SEO, but potentially some of the SEO issues, this would kind of work around that. Something else you can do, and some people don't know that this is possible, it's very easy to create multiple React apps on the same page, right? You just, a React app starts with kind of a root element, you give it an ID, and it starts from there. And from there, it builds the entire DOM tree that it outputs. But you can actually target as many elements as you want. You can target, you can do it by class and select a list of them if you wanted to. And most of our applications, we actually have multiple apps, but we really split it up into apps when we want the state to be very isolated. There's any communication, we'll use events, but really we prefer to keep it all in a single app with a single piece of listed state, and then it's shared across all the components. So portals ended up being a much kind of simpler way of approaching this. And the final piece, and this is one of those things where we built it and then we realized we kind of forgot we need to update all this other stuff on the page. So imagine for a second that I pick red and large, right? So these are my selections. Now I have to load data for a specific product, kind of like a variant of the product that I'm selling. The title of the page now has to change. And React doesn't control that because it's just a portal to some, or sorry, it's not a portal, it's just some H1 that got rendered by the server. React has no idea it exists, right? It's just there. So the way that we manage this is that we use like essentially a side effect. So if you're familiar with React hooks, we have a use effect, and whenever color or size change, if they're both set, we grab the new data and we update them. And so basically anything that is server-side rendered, descriptions, titles, that kind of stuff, we will update with plain old vanilla JS, which is definitely interesting. It adds complexity. It is not. It is a big trade-off, right? We know that it's not necessarily the ideal way of handling this, but it works. It works actually pretty well.
Ernesto, why wouldn't that be just another portal? I mean, what's the distinction that would?
You could do a portal. The problem is that if you do a portal, so we have that constraint of having the markup in one place. If you did a portal and you wanted to override the content, you could do that, but then you have two options. At least that I could find. Is you either duplicate, you have to have the React component have like the H1 class, blah, 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 with all the wrappers, and then also on the server, and then you kind of override it. Or something that I did, which was kind of gross, was I had a portal that essentially grabbed the inner HTML and dangerously injected it into React, and now I had, but it didn't really give me control over it. It sort of created a copy of it. But I couldn't find a way to really to work around that. But that's definitely one of those things that we didn't love. So how am I doing on time?
I'll just go about 15 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's look at our case study. Too big. So I made a little tiny sample. A store. So I sell shirts now.
Awesome.
And yeah, they're awesome. They come in different colors. And basically what I did is I just used Create React App, a big Create React App fan, just to demo kind of how this works. At the end of the day, Create React App has an index.html file. I just put a bunch of content in there, and I will need you all to use your imaginations that a really fancy backend rendered that for you. All right? But it's essentially the same concept. So I'll refresh the page a couple times. Loads pretty quickly. You can kind of see it flash a little bit. That's one of the limitations that I want to talk about. But usually it's a fair enough of a trade-off. So let's just take a look at how this page works. So keep an eye out for the title here. It just says awesome shirt. It says awesome shirt here. The shirt is red. I'm gonna have you keep an eye on a lot of things here, but the description is gonna change too. You can see I have some selections here, so I can look at green, or I can look at blue, and you can see that the image of the shirt changes. And then if I pick medium, it's going to spin for a second. And this is really important. It's something that we do in our own product. We're going to load additional details. Now, of course, this is all just completely faked. But we might say, like, well, this particular shirt has a specific piece of content associated to it, right? Maybe blue, you want to say, like, I don't know, it brings you good luck or something, whatever. You want to put some stuff in there. And you'll actually notice that the description at the bottom will change. I just sort of hard-coded it. But you can load availability details. I believe if it's green, it'll tell you it's out of stock. There you go. So it's out of stock and you can't add it to your cart, right? Just kind of has some of the basic behaviors. Now, let's take a look at the code, right? Actually, no, before I do that, notice that the URL, as I've been changing these, has been changing, and also the title tag, as well as the H1. Now, the reason we do this is that we actually will serve, and this is kind of specific to us, but we serve the main product with all of its content, and then we'll serve the variant separately. Then we'll have canonicals and all that other good stuff. Are you familiar with that? And we just sort of kind of make it look like when I refresh the next time that the state got preserved, even though it's not a spot or anything like that. It's not keeping it in a state, it's just literally a separate page. But we make it kind of appear seamless. So let's take a look at some code. A little too big here. Okay, is that okay for everybody? Okay. Cool. So this is the HTML file that Create React App will generate. And let's take a look up here. Oops. Let's take a look up here. So this is SEO critical content, right? The title and some description. There's additional things you can do in here, but just for the sake of this, we're just going to say these two are really key. Now, let's go further down. Just to show you a little bit, I am using the sort of initial state driven by what the server renders. It is very, very bare bones here. I could include things like pricing. I could include other things. I'm just not doing it. But it's just kind of to show the concept. And here's the link to the Redux site showing how all this stuff works. That's my header. And this is where it gets interesting. This is the React app container. So you still need a single React app that's going to do stuff on your page. I am not sure, and Joe, maybe you know, if there's a way to not necessarily have one of these. If you can just kind of have this abstract React kind of app existing without a...
say docking. I'm not sure you can.
Maybe, yeah. So I was wondering about that. I'm like, I wonder if I even need this. But anyway, it's just an empty div, so you don't see it on the page, right? It's just there. We can use some classes maybe to hide it if it's messing with spacing, whatever. And it doesn't really affect the layout, right? It really has nothing to do with the layout, which is a little bit weird. But now let's take a look at these layouts. And actually, I'm going to start with layout number 2 because that's the way I left it when I was testing this. And you're going to notice a couple things. So here's my H1, right? So this is server-side rendered. Again, this is not React rendering this. It's got a class and it's got an ID. And then you're going to notice here's my description that's also server-side rendered and it also has an ID. But now let's take a look at these other divs. I've got product images, there's selections, price, availability, and add to cart. These are also server-side rendered. And they have IDs. And these IDs are the ones that I'm going to target with React portals. So again, the server gets to determine the layout, and React gets to call this and display the content that I need. Now, to show you kind of how this works, so this is the page. Let me just reset this. Okay. If I were to change the layout that it uses, I forgot to turn that off. Oops. Let's do this and get rid of this. Oops. Sorry, everybody. I think if I just do, nope.
So you're kind of simulating this for us right now, right?
Yeah, so this would be automatically done by your server based on like some flag on your page or something. But just to show you, now it looks completely different. Right? So if I go back and I just do Control-Z, and save, right? So it just changes the way that this renders entirely. I didn't touch the React code. These are still the same React components running against this page, which is kind of cool. Like that actually gives you some interesting opportunities if you're trying to build some kind of way of building, serving dynamic content, right? Which is very common with, again, enterprise-y type software. But let's take a look at what this looks like. And really, it's not, there's really nothing groundbreaking here, right? Here is the app. This is the main React app. And you're gonna notice here's my initial state, browser from window. No big deal, just initializes a hook at the top level with that state. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. I'm basically gonna serve it through context so that all of my other components have access to it. For anybody that doesn't really do much React, basically it just means that all of my other components underneath will get this stuff even if I don't pass it directly to them. I don't have to tell them this is a state, this is a product, this is whatever. They'll all just get access to it. It's just a little bit easier to show this. And of course, you can use Redux, you can use whatever you want. This is just a proof of concept, really. So let's take a look at what these look like. Actually, and before I do that, very important comment here. The order of these components does not matter, right? They're all just pointing at different parts of your page. So if I were to change, for example, images and
It doesn't matter because they're all their own React apps.
So they're not React apps. They're just components that return a portal to these. They could be apps. They could be apps, but in this case, they're not. And you can see that nothing changes, right? And that's okay. We just simply ignore the fact that that you can see some of my refactoring work there. Oh no, I'm breaking everything. All right, hold on.
Undo.
Hold on, I can do this. I can do this.
Undo.
What did I just delete?
Yeah.
You just close it and reload it.
No, never.
No, don't.
I never will. Here, I don't know why the IntelliSense isn't helping me out. I wish I used TypeScript. Everybody, you should use TypeScript.
Or Dart.
Or Dart, yes, also Dart. All right, here you go, I fixed it. All right, cool. So, let's take a look at these components. Let's look at images. So you want to render images, right? These are the images that show up on the shirt on the right-hand side here. First thing I do, good old document get element by ID. Most of you will be familiar with this. And then I, if I don't have the element, I just return null. For some reason, the server didn't render it. You could do whatever you wanted here, but I just said, you know what, I'm just not going to return it. And then I return a portal, and the portal will point to that element, that div that I created, and it's going to render this image to it, right? So this will just go directly in there. So your components, instead of now returning just JSX, will return a portal that'll render some of this content to the sort of container that the server will render. We can take a look at the cart, very similar. And it gets a little more interesting in selection. So this is the code that will manage the drop downs for size and color, right? So let's take a look here at this use effect. So essentially, whenever, and I'll go back down here further a little bit, whenever color or size change, if you're not familiar with React, whenever these change, the function that the callback will actually execute. That's really all that means. And I can do something about it. So in this case, I'm updating the color of the selected product. So that's why when I just change the color, the image changes. Otherwise, only if both of them are set, I will begin doing the sort of async call. And again, this is like us getting additional details, right? This is where you would get user-specific data, availability, that kind of thing. And what I'll load here is the new description and whether it's in stock or not. So I have to get a little bit of this additional information. So I wait for that. And then I check if the title element, so my H1 exists, and I can simply append to my title variable the size and the color, and then using inner text, it shows up on the page. So if I go back and I pick red and medium, that's what makes it show up right here, right in the H1. And similarly, this is what I'll use to update the window state so that I can update the URL, and as well as the title at the top of the page. Right? And again, this is just to kind of give users a more seamless experience. It's just nice to have the little tab title when you're browsing, so you can go back and be like, oh yeah, right, this was the red one versus this is the blue one. Maybe you're comparing them or something. Very common thing that we deal with. And finally, what I'll do is I will update the product state with the values that I loaded, including description and stock. And then I can also update the description. Again, it's just a side effect that says update the description element to have the value that I just loaded from the server. The rest of this is very simple React. It's just, I'm using semantic UI components. Pretty nice, I was just giving them a shot, but really not that interesting here. And so, let's go back to the presentation. All right. So, there's plenty of trade-offs. Ooh, let me start that. Okay, plenty of trade-offs. Complexity goes up in different places. So we want to reduce server-side complexity as much as possible, while still kind of keeping our hosting costs low. But this means that now we're not going to have something that's cohesive with an isomorphic app. That's 100% agree. Now our front-end developers have to be a little bit aware of what the server is rendering. Whereas if you have the isomorphic app, they don't. Not the best, but a trade-off that we've been willing to make. These UI flashes, they don't look super pretty, you know. You kind of see, especially on slow connections, you'll see kind of everything pushing down. Doesn't look great, particularly with this method. Only certain parts will show content, so at least you'll be able to see like the title and the description. But then images and all this other stuff will definitely pop in later, so you want to be careful with that. One of the things that we've done is on the server, we'll render the spinners on the server. So as soon as a page renders, you have some SVG that just shows a spinner, and then it gets completely eaten up by React, right? That actually works pretty well. It makes it look like it's all sort of client-side, and it ends up being pretty fast. But people will ask you, why do you have a spinner for your add to cart button? And well, that's when you tell them that you're tricking them.
What is lying?
Well, that, yes.
And suspense wouldn't really help in your case, would it? Or I guess the experimental suspense now that's like all built around that perceived load time, where you can tell it like if it takes longer than this to load, then show the loading state.
What it would
otherwise just flash to it.
And we actually have a couple of forms where this happens, where you'll see the server side spinner, then you'll see a React spinner kind of take over, and if you look at it carefully, it looks a little different. So it looks like a spinner, then spinner was in text, and then it shows the React app. Unfortunately, you have to be really careful to make a match, but it doesn't really do a ton for us.
Disable the button until.
Yes, you also could do that.
Spinner.
And again, and the thing is, we want to be careful with the duplicate copies. That's where it gets tricky. People will be like, well, I updated it here. Why do I have to also update the markup on the server? Why isn't it just on the React side? And that's kind of the thing that we're trying to avoid. Okay. No? Sorry, just wasn't sure. Okay.
Can you share this code, the demo code?
Yeah, it's on my GitHub actually. So I will send the link to the meetup. So conclusion: server side rendered React without React on the server. Yeah, it's possible, and I definitely took some liberties with the title. React is still involved, very much so. We just move it out of the server so we don't have to deal with some of the performance issues that we have. And of course, being from a .NET shop, we don't really get access to a lot of this stuff anyway. So we had to kind of get a little bit creative, to be able to keep our site performance fast while keeping developers happy by having React available. Another thing that I didn't mention is, of course, not all pages require SEO, right? Not all pages are like this. So I would say we have like maybe 10% of our pages really do. A lot of the other ones are utilities like your My Account area where you're managing your passwords and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of state there, order history, things like that. Go use React, do it all client side, go nuts, right? It's just fantastic. So for us, a lot of the trade-offs really end up being worth it. And so, yeah, and again, the server-side part of this doesn't just have to be done by React. You can just use any backend. Just as long as the code is the elements are rendered on the server, even if it's a flat file, you can get React to use portals in a kind of a sneaky way and get the result that you need. This will make sure that your SEO will be great. You will still have excellent performance in the backend, so you don't have to worry about that. And and then your clients will be happy. So that is it.
At the conclusion, are you getting the performance that you were looking for that you weren't getting from the other?
100%.
Just a random question, like, could you? I mean, clearly you could, but would it be stupid to say, even if your backend was Node, this would be a good?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually would be better. Yeah, because you're rendering as long as. Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine it would be faster to just render something simple like this. And even if you, it absolutely would. It absolutely would scale better.
So I've always been curious about this. If what you're trying to do is game SEO, how long does it take for you to game this, see a result, and then have to go tweak it? I mean, you're trying to game SEO to the best results, and you don't really know how, and you have to kind of mess with it to see what works. How long does that take?
It depends. It depends. I mean, we know basically a lot of the decisions on what we put on the back end for SEO purposes, it will be a recommendation from our SEO team. So they'll tell us, like, you make sure you got this, and this, or you're fired. I'm like, okay. And so we put that stuff in there, right? Now, are there exceptions? Of course. And
so you guys are really good at guessing. Okay, fine.
No, you know what?
I don't know if I
so
would.
I've done a bunch of
SEO
SEO work, but I'm a little bit
Yeah,
behind the
there's-
times. But to some degree, it's always the same. You make a change, you will find that amount of time that you have, and this is important, you have trained the Google spiders to come to your site. Because the Google spiders do not, or whatever you want to call them, the crawlers, do not come to your site if nothing ever changes on your site. Which is why you need new content, which is why every major site that's really vying for SEO, they've got a blog, they've got news posts, because you're training Google, come back and scrape my website this often because there's new content here for you to scrape that you haven't gotten. But once you've trained that to come back, you can start making those changes and say, now we're going to try this, and we're going to see a result in X amount of days. We're going to see a jump or a decrease in our listing or in our result findings because we know we're trained. Now, that's not perfectly gaming it, but that's certainly a part of the process is figuring out how often Google's going to come back and
this is just like SEO basics. I mean, you can do, like Joe was saying, the unique content stuff, and there's so much stuff you can do to really, truly kind of abuse what Google does. This is just saying, Google, don't get mad at me. It's really just not to get penalized for not having some of the basics.
Right.
And also, of course, we run a lot of auditing tools that'll tell us, do we have enough content? Does everything look okay? But it's not, it's definitely, I just want to be clear, it's not like we're trying to kind of do something naughty. It's just really finding a way to keep Google content is really what we're trying
The
to do.
site Ernesto mentioned, kind of, it's been 4 or 5 months since it launched, and Google still hasn't finished indexing it. And usually our clients and ourselves hire third-party crawlers, SEMrush, I forgot the names, but they go in and tell us what they think the issue is. But again, it might be completely false because Google doesn't share what they use, or algorithm, or whatever they call it. So
The other
yes, we're good at guessing.
very good at it. The other thing that's interesting, kind of related to this project that shall not be named, is that Google will hit your site as much as it can as long as it doesn't think it's going to bring it down. If your site is slow, Google will index it less. So
Unless
keeping,
it's, sorry.
unless no, you can add a caveat. I'm totally with that.
And then there's Bing.
Oh yeah, Bing doesn't care. Bing will we might have blocked Bing a couple times. It's a problem. Like it'll literally bring sites down. But the problem with like Google's approach is great. It's shockingly benevolent for them. But it'll wait and it'll be like, oh, your requests are getting a little slower. I'm gonna chill. And the problem is that then you have this issue where it simply doesn't get all the content, and then you have other problems. But anyway.
It
That's
sounds
it.
like an icing, but it's a penalty.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is a penalty. Yes.
Well, your homepage is slow, we're not going to bother with your
Yeah, like maybe next time. We'll get it in a week.
We'll check that out.
You're
next
fine,
week
yeah.
After Valentine's Day.
So
We probably spent over 2 months trying to fix what was wrong with Next.js and render to string, and just the thread blocking element of render to string. Just we had.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt this. I'm going to say it would be great to do a talk on profiling Node. Him along with Ryan. They've done some really low-level stuff. It's really
That
interesting.
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, right? That's what I'm saying.
We need you in February. Probably
Hey.
third Thursday, if that's not Valentine's Day.
Profiling
bad-
Node by Ernesto said so.
Anyway, that's it, everybody. So
Just send me their info. and
yes,
make sure
I will.
Sadly, profiling Node doesn't really work.
I like
Okay.
that title even better.
Well, I'd like Mike to come afterward to prove that it does.
Prove that.
All right.
Just wait.
Thank you, Ernesto.